The planet Solstice was a joyless rock, spinning alone in the cold void like an unwanted orphan. Maybe that was why humans had picked it for their last stand. Misery loves company, and what better companion than a planet as grim as your prospects? Captain Drex, self-appointed leader of this ragtag colony, stood on the crumbling balcony of the command center, gazing out at the barren landscape. "This place is a dump," he muttered, scratching at the stubble on his chin. "But it's our dump." Below, the colony buzzed with a frantic energy that only comes from desperation. People scurried like ants, trying to patch up the holes in their tiny world with duct tape and a prayer. A prayer to what exactly? The void? The gods? Drex wasn't sure there were any left listening, or if they ever had been. "Captain," came a sharp voice behind him. It was Fasula, his second in command and the closest thing he had to a friend in this cosmic asylum. She had the kind of face that seemed permanently set to disapproving, like she'd been born with a furrowed brow and a disdain for stupidity. "Fasula," he greeted, turning away from the view of impending doom. "Got any good news?" "Like a surprise birthday party or a shipment of chocolate. Sorry to disappoint, Captain. Just the usual. We're out of everything, morale's in the toilet, and oh, by the way, there's an alien armada surrounding the planet." Drex sighed, leaning back against the railing. "You know, Fasula, you really know how to brighten a guy's day." "Aliens, huh? What do they want?" "Apparently, not to invite us to a picnic," she replied dryly. "Scans show they're packing enough firepower to turn us into a fine mist." "Great. So, we're stuck on this hellhole with a bunch of angry aliens playing Ring Around the Rosie." "Pretty much," she nodded. "And since our fuel reserves are empty, running isn't an option." "Well, that's just perfect. Nothing like a good old-fashioned siege to really get the blood pumping." Drex kicked a loose pebble off the balcony. It tumbled down, disappearing into the dusty street below. Down in the colony square, a makeshift market had sprung up. Traders haggling over goods that no sane person would want but desperate people would kill for. Canned air, recycled water, bootlegged entertainment chips. Drex and Fasula descended into the chaos, navigating through the bustling crowd. A voice called out from a nearby stall. "Hey, Captain. You got any space credits? Got some vintage Earth magazines here. Real paper." "Oh sure," Drex chuckled. "I'll just pull some out of my non-existent wallet." "Maybe next time." They pushed past the vendor, who muttered something unkind under his breath. Fasula rolled her eyes. "These people are going to lose it if we don't do something soon." "You think I don't know that?" Drex snapped, rubbing his temples. "I've got a headache that could kill a lesser man and an alien fleet itching to blow us to bits. We're fresh out of plans, Fasula. We could always try diplomacy," she suggested, though even she didn't sound convinced. "Diplomacy? With a bunch of trigger-happy aliens? They probably think diplomacy is a type of seasoning." They made their way to the command center, a cobbled-together mess of technology and scrap metal. Inside, the air was heavy with the scent of ozone and human sweat. Their tech officer, a twitchy guy named Leech, was hunched over a console, muttering to himself like a mad preacher. He looked up as they entered. "Captain, you hear about the Armada?" "Just a whisper." "What do you got for me, Leech?" Leech tapped at the screen, bringing up a holographic display of the planet surrounded by a swarm of enemy ships. "They're not moving in yet, but they are watching us, probably deciding how to cook their human stew." "Charming," Fasula said, leaning over his shoulder. "Any chance we can get a message out?" Leech shook his head. "They've got us jammed tighter than the Colonel's arteries after the fried chicken buffet." Drex rubbed his temples again. "So, we're on our own. No way out, no way to call for help." "Looks like it," Leech confirmed, running a hand through his greasy hair. "Unless you've got a secret fleet hidden up your sleeve." "Sorry, fresh out of those too," Drex replied, pacing the cramped room. "We need a plan, something clever." "Well, if we're using cleverness, we're screwed," Fasula quipped, earning a laugh from Leech. Drex stopped pacing, staring at the holographic display. "Maybe. Maybe we don't need clever. Maybe we just need crazy." Fasula raised an eyebrow. "Crazy? Yeah," Drex nodded, more to himself than anyone else. "If we can't fight them, can't run, maybe we can trick them. Make them think we're more trouble than we're worth. And how do you propose we do that? Fasula asked, folding her arms. We bluff. We make them think we've got a weapon that'll blast them to kingdom come. Make them paranoid enough to back off and leave us alone, Leech snorted. And what do we call this miraculous weapon? The big lie, Drex grinned. Exactly. We just need to make it believable. Fasula looked skeptical but intrigued. It's still a long shot. Long shots are all we've got, Drex replied, determination hardening his features. Leech, start working on a plan. Make it look real. I'll need some time, Leech said, already tapping away at his console. Time is the one thing we're short on, Fasula interjected. Don't remind me, Drex said, rubbing his temples once again. I've got a headache to nurse and a colony to keep from imploding. As Drex left the command center, Fasula followed, her brow furrowed in thought. Do you really think this will work? I think it's the best bad idea we've got, Drex replied, stepping back into the colony's chaotic streets. In the sky above, the alien ships glinted like malevolent stars, a constant reminder of their precarious situation. The people of Solstice might be fighting a losing battle, but Drex knew one thing. Humanity wasn't going down without a fight. And if they had to lie, cheat, and bluff to survive, so be it. What's the worst that could happen? Drex muttered under his breath as he headed back into the market. Oh, right, total annihilation. As he walked, a loudspeaker crackled to life, blaring an announcement from the Colony Council. Attention, citizens of Solstice. We are aware of the alien presence and assure you that measures are being taken. Please remain calm and continue with your duties. Remember, a united community is a strong community, yeah, and a dead community is a quiet one, Drex mumbled as he pushed through the bustling crowd. He could feel the tension in the air, the collective fear simmering just beneath the surface. It was like walking through a minefield, except the mines were people and they could explode at any moment. He found a small corner of relative quiet, tucked away from the main throng. Leaning against a wall, he took a moment to collect his thoughts. The aliens would be expecting them to scramble, to panic, but perhaps that was their advantage. They had nothing to lose and desperation could make people dangerous. Back at the command center, Leech was hard at work, fingers flying over the keyboard like a man possessed. Fasula watched him with a wary eye, a silent sentinel keeping watch over their last hope. You really think this will work? Fasula asked again, not for the first time. Leech shrugged, a crooked smile on his lips. Who knows? But if there's one thing I've learned out here, it's that sometimes the universe rewards stupidity with survival. Fasula chuckled darkly. Well, we've got plenty of stupidity to spare. In the dim light of the command room, their laughter rang out, a defiant sound against the encroaching darkness. They might be outgunned, outnumbered, and backed into a corner, but they weren't out of the fight yet. As Drex rejoined them, he looked at his two companions, a grin spreading across his face. Let's give these aliens something to worry about. And with that, the last human colony on Solstice began their desperate gamble. They would either outlast the siege or go down in a blaze of glory. Either way, they would remind the universe why it should never, ever underestimate humanity. The air in Solstice wasn't so much breathable as it was a suggestion of what oxygen might feel like. Drex inhaled deeply, pitifully aware that he wasn't really clearing his mind so much as marinating it in recycled breaths and despair. All around him, the colony was buzzing with anxious energy, like a kicked ant nest, minus the organized chaos and more random flailing about. What's the plan, Captain? Fasula asked, appearing at his side like some kind of judgmental shadow. Plan, Drex muttered, feigning ignorance. I thought we were just going to wait it out and hope the aliens die of boredom. Fasula's expression didn't even flinch. She was used to his brand of optimism. The armada up there. They're not here to play Monopoly. Wish they were. I've got a killer strategy for free parking, Drex quipped, though his thoughts were already elsewhere, drifting along with the dust motes in the stale air. Suddenly, a sound cut through the chaos, a low, mechanical rumble like God had decided to crank up the bass. The alien ships, hovering above like a swarm of angry bees with a vendetta, were broadcasting something, and it wasn't an invitation to their annual barbecue. Humans of Solstice, blared the ominous voice, vibrating through the very bones of the colony. Your resistance is futile. Surrender now, and we may grant you mercy. Mercy? Drex snorted, casting a sidelong glance at Fasula. What do you think? Slimy pits or slightly less slimy pits? Fasula crossed her arms, unimpressed. I'd hate to ruin their day by not playing along with their little script. Yeah, we're nothing if not considerate invaders, Drex agreed, savoring the sarcasm like it was the last piece of chocolate in the galaxy. The aliens didn't seem to take a hint, their message repeating like a broken record of doom. It was psychological warfare 101. Demoralize, divide, conquer. But Drex had seen enough bad movies to know how this went, and he wasn't about to roll over and let them win by monologue alone. Walking back to the command center, he found Leech still glued to the console, a look of intense concentration on his face like he was about to solve the universe's greatest mystery, how to get the last bit of ketchup out of the bottle. Leech, tell me you've got some good news, Drex said, leaning over the young man's shoulder. Well, the good news is I've got a killer idea for a fake superweapon, Leech replied. The bad news? The laundry list of things I don't have includes technology, time, and a clue. So all the major food groups, Fasula commented, scanning the cryptic diagrams on the screen. Details, Leech. What's this superweapon supposed to do? Scare them to death. That's the gist, Leech said, tapping on the screen like it owed him money. We rig up some old reactors, a few flashy lights, and a lot of bluster. Make it look like we've got a doomsday device just itching to send them back to whatever pit they crawled out of. A bluff, Drex mused, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. High-stakes poker where we're about to bet the farm with a pair of twos. And if they call it, Fasula asked, ever the pragmatist, we'll be the laughingstock of the galaxy for all of 5 seconds. Then boom. Exactly, Drex said, his eyes glinting with a mad sort of determination. But if the galaxy's gonna laugh, let's at least make it a good show. Fasula's lips twitched upwards, a rare expression of amusement. All right. What's the first step in pretending we're more dangerous than a colony of squirts? Step 1, Drex said, rolling his shoulders like he was about to dive into a brawl, get the people on our side. Leech, you think you can hack into the aliens' message system? Send a little surprise their way, Leech grinned, an expression that usually meant trouble was about to follow. I'll need a few minutes, but yeah, I can manage a little digital graffiti. Perfect. Let's give them something to think about. A few minutes later, as Drex prepared to address the colony, Leech's hack crackled through the airwaves. The alien message cut abruptly to static, then back to Drex's voice, projected across the whole settlement. People of Solstice, Drex began, trying his best to sound like Captain Kirk if Kirk had been having the worst day of his life. You've heard the aliens' offer. You've also heard their lies. We're not going to roll over for these bastards. We're going to make them work for every inch of this rock. The crowd in the square quieted, listening intently as Drex continued. They want us scared, divided, ready to give up at the first sign of trouble. But we've got something they don't. We have each other, and a plan, a crazy, brilliant plan. Hope they're buying that, Fasula said, arms still folded as she watched the crowd, their faces a mix of fear and defiance. Drex's tone turned conspiratorial. And just to sweeten the deal, we've got a little surprise for our guests. A weapon they won't see coming. So keep your heads up, your spirits high, and remember, they might have us surrounded, but they've also trapped themselves with us. The broadcast ended, and the crowd erupted into a mix of cheers and nervous chatter. Hope, as thin and fragile as it was, began to weave through the crowd like a thread in a fraying tapestry. Leech slid out from under the console, a cocky grin plastered on his face. And they said making a name for myself on the intergalactic hacker boards was a waste of time. You ever think about a career in motivational speaking? Fasula asked Drex dryly as they headed back into the command center. Nah, Drex replied, his mind still racing with a million what-ifs. I hear the Iors are terrible, and the audiences don't usually have blasters pointed at you. Inside, the mood was tense but energized. Plans were forming, shifting like sand underfoot. Drex knew they were up against a heavily armed fleet, but what else was he supposed to do? Lie down and wait for the inevitable. I say we give them a proper solstice welcome, Facula said, her eyes gleaming with a rare fire. Let's make them regret underestimating us. Leech was already back at the console, humming a tune that sounded suspiciously like Another One Bites the Dust. Think they'll fall for it, Captain. If they don't, we'll make them wish they had, Drex said, a steely edge to his voice. Let's roll the dice. The plan was simple because they had little choice for anything else. Make it look good, make it sound big, and hope the aliens weren't in the mood for a closer inspection. As the Iors dragged on, the colony buzzed with activity. People who had been paralyzed with fear were suddenly moving, working, contributing to the grand charade. Pieces of old equipment were hauled out, dusted off, and given a new purpose in the most elaborate bluff the universe had ever seen. Never thought I'd say this, Facula remarked, overseeing a team attempting to weld a reactor to look more menacing than functional. But it's almost like everyone's forgotten we're on the brink of extinction. Funny how impending doom can really bring people together, Drex said, watching the scene with a mixture of pride and disbelief. Iors passed, and finally, as the fake superweapon neared completion, Drex took a moment to lean back and survey their handiwork. It was a theatrical masterpiece of wires, lights, and enough technical jargon to confuse a sentient AI. Looks like a death ray, Leech said with a hint of wonder. A really shoddy, cobbled-together death ray. Yeah, but it's our shoddy death ray, Drex replied, adjusting a stray wire. And it's got one hell of a scowl. The next step was to announce their weapon to the aliens. Drex took the microphone, hoping his voice didn't betray just how crazy this all felt. Attention, alien armada. We've developed a weapon capable of vaporizing anything in orbit. Retreat now, or face the consequences. The silence that followed was deafening, a thick blanket of anticipation draped over the entire colony. Drex could almost hear the collective holding of breath as they waited for a response that might never come. And then, a reply. Humans of Solstice, the voice crackled back, laced with a mix of irritation and disbelief. Your bluff is transparent and your efforts are futile. Well, that's not what I wanted to hear, Leech muttered, fingers flying over the console again, as if searching for a magic button labeled Make Them Leave. They're testing us, Facula said, eyes scanning the horizon as if expecting the ships to burst into laughter at any moment. We need to keep up the pressure. Make it look like we're serious. Oh, we're serious, Drex said, the gears in his mind turning at double speed. Let's give them a light show. Something they'll remember. With a nod from Drex, Leech activated the mock weapon, sending sparks flying and lights flashing in a display that was more Hollywood than HoloWar. But desperate times called for desperate measures, and Drex was counting on the aliens being just paranoid enough to take the bait. If this doesn't work, Facula said, crossing her arms, I'm blaming you. I'd be disappointed if you didn't, Drex replied, eyes fixed on the skies. But hey, at least we're going out with a bang. As the fake weapon hummed and sputtered, the alien ship seemed to hesitate, a subtle shift in their formation. It was the first sign that maybe, just maybe, they were buying it. Well, I'll be damned, Leech said, leaning back in his chair with a look of sheer disbelief. They're actually considering it. Good, Drex said, his voice heavy with the weight of what they were doing. Now let's hope their survival instincts are stronger than their pride. The wait was agonizing, every second stretching into eternity. But the people of Solstice had endured worse, and they could wait a little longer if it meant outlasting those who sought to destroy them. And so, beneath the artificial stars of their own making, the last human colony on Solstice held its breath, daring to hope that perhaps, against all odds and reason, they might just pull this off, even if it was just for another day. The aliens were not the type to take a bluff lightly. No, they were the type to poke and prod until the house of cards you'd meticulously stacked came tumbling down in a glorious mess of delusion. Their probing attacks began almost immediately after Drex's little light show, like a kid trying to find the weak spots in a toothache. The first attack was a half-hearted volley of plasma bursts, as if they were testing how flammable the colony was. The blast streaked across the sky, painting it in ominous shades of doom. The colonists, bless their anxious hearts, rushed to reinforce the already flimsy barricades with whatever flotsam they could find. It wasn't much, but it was all they had. "Looks like they're being gentle with us," Facula quipped, her eyes glued to the distant flashes. "Maybe they are worried we'll break. Or maybe they just like their meat tenderized before the main course," Drex replied, scanning the horizon, his mind a whirlpool of thoughts. "Either way, we've got to keep them on their toes." As if on cue, Engineer Kala burst into the command center, a bundle of frenetic energy and wild ideas. She was the kind of person who thrived under pressure, like a lunatic scientist with a penchant for chaos. "Captain," she said, out of breath, "I think I've got a way to give us some breathing room." "Breathing room, eh?" Drex said, raising an eyebrow. "I like the sound of that. You know, just as long as it doesn't involve us all suffocating in the process." "No promises," she grinned, pulling up a series of schematics on the console. "I've been working on something that might mask our presence. Use the planet's natural environmental interference to scramble their sensors." "Is that even possible?" Facula asked, skeptical but intrigued. She crossed her arms, an expression that screamed disbelief mixed with a hint of hope. "With what we've got here, probably not," Kala admitted, her grin not faltering. "But I'm willing to give it a damn good try. What's the worst that could happen? We're already screwed, right?" "Sounds like a plan," Drex said, nodding with approval. "A ridiculous, long shot of a plan, but it's not like we're swimming in alternatives." Kala got to work, dragging Leech into her techno-madness. The two of them were a whirlwind of mismatched wires and hastily scribbled notes. If hope had a face, it was probably laughing at them from behind a curtain of improbability. Meanwhile, the colony was facing another adversary, the soul-crushing reality of dwindling resources. Rations were cut, and what little food they had left was doled out with all the enthusiasm of a tax collector. The grumbling from the colonists was loud enough to rival the alien bombardment. Drex, ever the reluctant leader, called a meeting in the main mess hall. The place was packed with grim faces and empty stomachs, the air thick with a blend of desperation and stale air. "Right, listen up," Drex began, his tone a mix of authority and resignation. "We're in a bit of a tight spot here. Resources are low, and it looks like we're going to have to tighten our belts even more. Tighten them any more and I'll be wearing mine as a necklace," someone grumbled from the back, drawing a murmur of agreement from the crowd. "Look, I know it's rough," Drex continued, trying to maintain some semblance of control. "But we've got a plan. Kala's working on something that might buy us some time. So let's stick together and try not to eat each other, yeah?" There was a ripple of nervous laughter, the kind that comes when humor is your only shield against despair. It was thin comfort, but in a place like Solstice, thin was about as good as it got. Back in the command center, Kala and Leech were making progress, or at least creating enough sparks to make it look that way. "If we can amplify the planetary interference," Kala explained, mostly to herself, "we might just be able to make it look like there's nothing here but good old rock and toxic clouds." "And what happens if they decide to come down and check for themselves?" Leech asked, his fingers dancing over the keyboard like a concert pianist on caffeine. "Then we're screwed," Kala replied, not missing a beat. "But at least we'll be screwed with style." Iors turned into days, and the aliens continued their cautious probing. Each attack was met with the colony's pitiful defenses and a barrage of sarcastic commentary. If they were going to go out, they were going to do it on their terms, with a middle finger raised to the cosmos. The resource situation didn't improve. In fact, it seemed to worsen by the hour. The rations were now less meal and more suggestion of a meal, with portions so small they'd probably not even satiate a colony of ants. "Well, this is depressing," Fasula remarked, staring down at her plate of something with all the nutritional value of a sheet of paper. "I'd kill for a burger right about now." "You'd probably have to," Drex replied, pushing around his own food with a fork, as if he expected it to start moving on its own. "I hear they are an endangered species these days." Despite the grim conditions, the colony held together with the kind of camaraderie that only shared misery can forge. Jokes were cracked, stories were shared, and dreams of a better tomorrow were spun like the most fragile of webs. Meanwhile, Kala's plan was nearing completion. The improvised system was a patchwork of old tech and pure, unadulterated stubbornness. It was, quite possibly, the biggest gamble they'd ever taken. As they prepared to activate it, Drex gathered the core team around. "All right, folks, this is it. Showtime. Let's see if we can convince our unwelcome guests to take a little vacation, or at least get them to check out some other planet's real estate," Fasula added, ever the realist. Kala took a deep breath and flipped the switch. The system hummed to life, a low, almost soothing sound that belied the chaos they hoped it would create in the alien sensors. "Okay," Kala said, watching the monitors intently. "If this works, we should see a change in their formation. If it doesn't, well, at least we tried." The tension was palpable, every eye on the screens as they waited for any sign of change. It was like watching a pot, hoping it would boil, all while knowing the stove might be busted. And then something happened. The alien ships, previously holding their oppressive line, began to shift. It was subtle but unmistakable, a ripple in their formation like a stone tossed into a pond. "Oh, that's promising," Leach said, his tone a mix of surprise and relief. "Looks like they're second-guessing themselves." "Let's hope they keep doing that," Drex said, a hint of cautious optimism creeping into his voice. "The longer they stay confused, the better our chances." The colony watched with bated breath, each minute feeling like an eternity. But for the first time, it seemed like they might just have a chance to survive this nightmare. It wasn't much, but it was enough to rekindle the faint spark of hope that had been flickering in the hearts of Solstice's beleaguered inhabitants. Yet, as the saying goes, hope is a fickle thing. The aliens could regroup at any moment, and the resource situation remained a ticking time bomb. But for now, they had bought themselves a little more time. Time to plan, time to rest, and perhaps, just perhaps, time to dream of a future where they weren't under siege. Drex looked out over the colony from the command center balcony, the barren landscape of Solstice stretching out before him. It wasn't much to look at, but it was home, and damn it, he'd do everything in his power to keep it that way. "Another day, another miracle," Fasula said, joining him. "Think we've got another one in us?" "I suppose we'll find out," Drex replied, a wry smile playing at his lips. "One thing's for sure, though. If we're going to go down, we're going down swinging." The two of them stood there for a while, watching the distant stars and the alien ships that blotted them out. It was a grim, uncertain future, but they faced it with the stubborn determination that only those with nothing left to lose could muster. For on Solstice, the fight was far from over. But in that moment, beneath the oppressive sky and the weight of overwhelming odds, they found a strange sort of peace. Because they were still here, still fighting, still daring to hope. And sometimes in the vast, uncaring void of space, that was enough. The command center of the colony on Solstice hummed with a tension so thick it could have been sliced and served as a side dish to the meager rations. Captain Drex stood on the command center balcony, a makeshift perch of authority, staring out at a horizon that was about as inspiring as a soggy piece of toast. The alien armada had been up to their usual tricks, but today was different. The ships had repositioned, blotting out the sun in a display of cosmic bullying that could only mean one thing: the aliens were upping the ante. Drex grimaced. Solar eclipses weren't quite as enchanting when they were orchestrated by a hostile force with a penchant for psychological warfare. "Well, at least they're creative with their intimidation tactics," Fasula commented, sauntering up next to him. She had a knack for popping up at the least convenient moments, like a bad habit or a catchy tune. Yeah, but I'm not sure creative counts for much when you're trying to kill someone, Drex replied, arms crossed, his eyes fixed on the alien blockade. Seems like they're going for the full oppressive vibe. Next, they'll probably start playing some existential doom music. Facula snorted. Guess we should be grateful they haven't figured out how to pump their evil soundtracks directly into our brains. Give them time, Drex muttered. They've got nothing but time and an overdeveloped sense of theatricality. Back inside, the command center buzzed with activity. Engineer Kala was in her element, barking orders and waving her arms like a demented conductor orchestrating a symphony of chaos. Leech flitted about like a frantic squirrel, tailing her every move with a mix of awe and fear. "We're going to have to adapt," Kala said, her voice cutting through the din like a laser scalpel. "They're blocking out the sun, which means we've got to become our own little ecosystems. Small, self-sufficient units," Drex echoed, joining the fray. "All right, folks, listen up. We need to break the colony into smaller groups. Everyone needs a role, something to keep them busy and alive." The colony wasn't exactly brimming with resources or morale, but it had one thing going for it: a stubborn refusal to die quietly. Drex laid out the plan, assigning tasks like a harried parent doling out chores to unruly children. "You get to lead the garden team," Drex said, pointing to a wiry man with a permanent scowl etched across his face. "And try not to eat the plants before they sprout this time." "Guess that means I'm on pest control," Facula quipped, earning a few chuckles from the tired crowd. Humor was a strange currency amongst the damned, but it was still currency. The small groups fanned out, each tasked with keeping their slice of the colony alive. The air was tinged with the scent of desperation, but there was also a strange undercurrent of camaraderie, a shared understanding that they were all in this mess together. As the days dragged on, the colony settled into its new routine of grim determination. Makeshift greenhouses sprung up like weeds in the barren landscape, each one tended to with the care usually reserved for newborns or the last chocolate bar in a zombie apocalypse. "Didn't think I'd end up a farmer," Facula mused, kneeling in the dirt. "But then, I didn't think I'd end up on this god-forsaken rock, either. Life's full of surprises, huh?" "Yeah, just wish they were the pleasant kind for once," Drex replied, wiping sweat from his brow. He'd taken to manual labor like a fish to a bicycle, but there was a certain satisfaction in seeing something grow, even if it was just out of spite. As the sunless days wore on, the colony became a microcosm of resilience. People who'd once been strangers were now comrades, bound together by the shared struggle against a foe that seemed to have way too much time on their hands. Drex found himself surprisingly calm amidst the chaos. Sure, they were still screwed 9 ways to Sunday, but there was something almost comforting in the routine of survival. Maybe it was the knowledge that they were all equally doomed, or maybe it was just the lack of viable alternatives. "Hey, Captain," Leech called out, interrupting Drex's musings. "Kala's got something she wants to show you." Drex followed Leech through the cluttered corridors of the command center, ducking under low-hanging wires and dodging piles of half-finished projects. Kala was in her element, surrounded by what could only be described as a shrine to technological improvisation. "Captain, you're gonna love this," Kala said, her eyes alight with a manic energy that was both inspiring and mildly terrifying. "I've rigged up a system to harness the ambient energy from the aliens' own blockade. Basically, we're gonna leech off their power like cosmic parasites." Drex raised an eyebrow. "Isn't that a bit risky? You know, in the poking a bear with a stick kind of way." "Sure is," Kala grinned. "But what's life without a little risk?" "Longer," Facula chimed in, joining them with a sardonic grin. The plan was audacious, bordering on suicidal, but then again so was everything else they'd tried. Drex nodded, bolstered by the grim determination that had become their rallying cry. "All right, let's do it. Maybe we can at least make them regret choosing us as their pet project." Kala and Leech set to work, the hum of machinery providing a soundtrack to their frantic efforts. The colony watched with bated breath, their hopes pinned on the slim chance that this latest gamble might pay off. "Think it'll work?" Fasula asked, leaning against a console and watching the controlled chaos unfold. "Does it matter?" Drex replied, his voice laced with dry humor. "We're already in over our heads. Might as well see how deep the pool goes." The system sputtered to life, a low growl that reverberated through the command center like the rumble of a sleeping beast. The air was charged with anticipation, every eye fixed on the monitors as they awaited the results. For a moment, nothing happened. Then gradually, the alien ships began to react, their formation shifting in a display of confusion that was almost comical. "Looks like we've got their attention," Leach said, his fingers dancing over the keyboard. "Good," Drex replied, arms crossed as he watched the alien dance unfold. "Maybe now they'll think twice before blocking out the sun like a bunch of melodramatic supervillains." The colony held its breath, every second stretching into an eternity as they waited for the inevitable counterattack. But for now, they had thrown a wrench in the aliens' plans, a small victory in a war that seemed destined to end badly. Back in their makeshift greenhouse, Fasula examined a sprouting plant with a mix of pride and disbelief. "Well, it's not much, but at least it's something." Drex nodded, a rare smile tugging at his lips. "Sometimes something is all you need." The days continued to pass in a blur of weary determination, the colony clinging to their fragile hope like a lifeline. And though the aliens remained an ever-present threat, the people of Solstice refused to go quietly into that good night. Their stubborn resilience became a beacon, a sign that even in the face of overwhelming odds, they were still capable of fighting back in their own small way. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep them going, one day at a time. As Drex stood on the command center balcony, surveying the makeshift community they had cobbled together from the pieces of their shattered lives, he felt a flicker of something that had been missing for far too long. Hope. It was a fragile thing, easily snuffed out by the harsh reality of their situation. But for now, it burned brightly, a testament to the indomitable spirit of a people who refused to give in. "Think we'll make it?" Fasula asked, her voice laced with the kind of hope that came from knowing you had nothing left to lose. "Not sure," Drex replied, eyes fixed on the distant horizon. "But I know one thing for certain." "What's that?" "We're not going down without a fight." Fasula chuckled, a sound that was equal parts defiance and relief. "Damn right we're not." The colony of Solstice stood on the precipice of destruction, their fate hanging in the balance. But in that moment, beneath the oppressive shadow of an alien armada, they found strength in each other and in the shared struggle that bound them together. And as the sunless days stretched into weeks, they continued to fight, continued to hope, and continued to defy the odds with every breath they took. Because on Solstice, giving up was never an option. The days on Solstice dragged like a bad hangover, and it wasn't long before the colony sank into the kind of despair that only comes from the realization that you're utterly screwed. Captain Drex, who'd been holding things together with the verbal equivalent of duct tape and hope, was now finding his leadership under scrutiny. "Maybe it's time to consider other options," a voice murmured from the back of the crowded command center. The speaker, a wiry woman who looked like she'd spent one too many hours glaring at the horizon, was one of the growing number who thought surrender might be a viable plan. Surrender, basically a euphemism for "let's give up and see what the aliens do with us." "Other options?" Drex asked, voice dripping with sarcasm. "Like what? Calling Space Uber for a lift maybe," she snapped. "Or maybe we send a message back to the aliens. See if they're open to negotiation." Drex snorted, the sound carrying a world of disbelief. "Negotiate? With those sun-blocking drama queens? They block out the light and now they want to talk peace." "What's next? They'll deliver pizza to our door," Fasula, who had been leaning against the console with a bemused expression, chimed in. "I hear alien pizza tastes like despair and bad decisions." There were a few scattered chuckles, but the tension was palpable, like a rubber band stretched too tight and ready to snap. "I get it, folks," Drex said, turning to face the crowd. "We're stuck between a rock and a hard place, and the rock's on fire. But until someone comes up with a better plan that doesn't involve us handing over the keys to the colony, we're sticking with the devil we know." The murmurs of dissent continued, but they were quieter now, smothered by the shared recognition that there was no easy way out of this mess. Drex watched as the group slowly broke apart, the colonists trudging back to their tasks with the kind of weary determination that came from knowing you had no choice but to keep going. Night came, though on solstice, the difference between day and night was purely theoretical. The blockade above ensured that the colony was plunged into an eternal twilight, a world where you couldn't tell time except by the wear and tear on your nerves. As the last of the grumbling crowd dispersed, Facula sidled up to Drex, her eyes gleaming with that dangerous mix of mischief and solidarity. "You're not really thinking about negotiating, are you? Not unless they are offering beachfront property and a week's supply of oxygen," Drex replied. "I'm just trying to keep us from tearing each other apart before the aliens get a chance to." Facula nodded, her gaze drifting out to the barren landscape beyond. "You're doing a hell of a job, Drex. Even if you do look like you've aged 10 years in the past 2 months." Drex attempted a smile, but it felt more like a grimace. "I hear gray hair gives you character." "Yeah, but alive gives you better odds." The command center was quieter now, the hum of machinery a soothing backdrop to the chaos that was their existence. Drex leaned against the railing, his thoughts drifting to the stories they used to tell back on Earth. Stories of heroes and legends, of people who faced impossible odds with a smile and a snappy one-liner. "Remember when we used to think space was the final frontier?" Drex mused aloud. "Turns out it was more of a final kick in the teeth." Facula chuckled softly. "Yeah, but hey, at least we're making history, right? The first colony to collectively lose its mind under an alien blockade. Put that on a plaque." "Maybe future generations will get a laugh out of it," Drex said, though he knew the chances of anyone surviving to make a plaque were slim to none. As if on cue, Engineer Kala emerged from her makeshift technological shrine, her face streaked with grime and determination. "Hey, Captain, we might have a way to boost our communication signals." "Great," Drex said. "Now we can tell the aliens to shove it more clearly." Kala smirked, wiping her hands on her jumpsuit. "Or we can try to reach any nearby ships. Maybe there's someone out there who hasn't written us off as a lost cause." "Well, isn't that optimistic?" Facula remarked. "I'd almost forgotten what that feels like." "Let's give it a shot," Drex decided, because at this point, what did they have to lose? Their reputation for stubbornness was already legendary. Might as well aim for being a cosmic nuisance as well. Kala and Leech got to work, the room filled with the sound of clattering keyboards and muttered curses. It was the kind of controlled chaos that would have made any outsider question the sanity of letting these people run anything more complicated than a toaster. "While we wait for the aliens to realize we're still here," Facula said, plopping down on a nearby crate, "how about we swap Earth stories? Remind ourselves of home." "Home," Drex echoed, settling down beside her, "where the air was breathable and the pizza didn't taste like existential dread." Others joined in, forming a ragtag circle around them. It was an impromptu storytelling session, the kind you'd find in a dive bar at 3 a.m., when everyone was too tired to keep pretending the world wasn't falling apart. "Remember the great blackout of 2085? Facula began, her eyes glinting with mischief. "Whole planet plunged into darkness because someone forgot to pay the solar bill. We had to light candles like cavemen with electricity." "I remember," Drex replied, his voice carrying a hint of nostalgia. "Everyone spent the night playing board games and telling ghost stories. It was like camping, but with fewer mosquitoes. We used to complain about the weather back home." Another colonist chimed in, an older man with hair as white as the snowstorms he was describing. "Now I'd kill for a bit of rain, or a snowball fight," Leech added, his fingers still flying over the keyboard. Never appreciated freezing my ass off until I came here. The stories flowed, each one a reminder of a time when their biggest worries were mundane and predictable. They laughed over tales of traffic jams and power outages, of holidays gone wrong and pets who'd chewed through furniture. And as they shared these snippets of a life now far beyond their reach, something changed in the air. It was subtle, like the first hint of dawn after a long, dark night. Hope, fragile and tentative but undeniably present, almost makes you forget we're standing on the brink of annihilation, Fasula murmured, leaning back and watching the stars, or lack thereof, above. Almost Drex agreed, a faint smile playing on his lips. But it's something. The makeshift circle of colonists lingered, drawing strength from each other's presence. They were a ragged bunch, tired and hungry and probably more than a little insane, but they were alive. And as long as that was true, they had a chance, however slim it might be. Here's to surviving another day, Drex said, raising an imaginary glass. And to making the bastards wish they'd chosen a different rock to play king of the hill on. To surviving, the others echoed, their voices a chorus of defiance and camaraderie. Night stretched on, and with it came the familiar weight of dread. But for the first time in what felt like forever, Drex felt a glimmer of something he hadn't dared to acknowledge. Hope. It was a dangerous thing, hope. It fed rebellion and inspired revolutions. It made people do stupid, reckless things in the name of a future that might never come. But it was also the spark that kept them going when everything else seemed impossibly bleak. "Think we'll make it?" Fasula asked, echoing the question she'd posed what felt like a lifetime ago. "Honestly," Drex said, chuckling, "I have no idea. But I know one thing." "What's that?" "We're too stubborn to go quietly." The declaration hung in the air, a challenge to an indifferent universe. The colony wasn't ready to throw in the towel just yet, and if the aliens wanted to test their resolve, they'd better be ready for one hell of a fight. "All right, enough with the sappy stuff," Fasula said, getting to her feet. "We've got work to do, people. Let's show those aliens we're not just a bunch of sitting ducks." With renewed determination, the colonists scattered, returning to their tasks with a vigor that belied their exhaustion. The sun might be gone and the odds might be stacked against them, but they had something the aliens couldn't take away: each other. And as long as they had that, they had a fighting chance. Drex watched them go, a sense of pride swelling in his chest. They were a motley crew, held together by little more than duct tape and spite, but they were his crew. And together, they were going to make damn sure the aliens regretted ever setting their sights on Solstice. "Ready to make some history, Captain?" Fasula asked, her voice filled with the kind of reckless confidence that could topple empires. "Ready as I'll ever be," Drex replied, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "Let's go show those bastards what we're made of." With a final nod, they headed back into the fray, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Because on Solstice, giving up was never an option. And as long as they had each other, they would continue to fight, continue to hope, and continue to defy the odds with every breath they took. In the end, that was all that mattered. In the dim glow of the command center, Calla paced like a caged panther, her mind a whirl of schematics and half-formed plans. She'd been at it for hours, piecing together every scrap of technical doodah they had left, and the result was a plan so half-baked it could barely be called a baked, let alone a strategy. Leech, her eternal shadow, watched with a mix of awe and horror, because that's what you do when your whole survival hinges on a woman who communicated with machines like they were her dysfunctional family. "All right, troops," Calla announced, gathering everyone's attention with the authority of a schoolmarm about to dole out detention. "I've got a plan. And before you ask, yes, it's as crazy as it sounds." Drex, lounging against the console with the air of a man who'd seen every possible disaster and still couldn't bring himself to care, raised an eyebrow. "A crazy plan from you, Calla. Color me surprised." Ignoring him, Calla continued, "The aliens are monitoring our communications. They've been ahead of us every step of the way because they know what we're doing before we do. Every time we whisper a plan or belch a command, they're listening in like the universe's most annoying eavesdropper. Facula chuckled from her perch atop a pile of cargo crates. So, what? We start speaking in Pig Latin. Etzle ustume uye istenersle. Calla shook her head. No, we fight boredom with boredom. We flood the airwaves with so much mundane chatter that their brains melt from the sheer pointlessness of it all. Leech blinked. You want to bore them to death? Exactly, Calla replied, her eyes gleaming with a mad kind of genius. We'll keep the important stuff offline. Everything else, weather reports, old Earth sitcoms, even those goddamn cat videos we saved for nostalgia, will be blasted out non-stop. That's gotta be the most ingenious and the dumbest plan I've ever heard, Facula remarked, her expression a perfect cocktail of amusement and disbelief. Think of it like psychological warfare, Calla said, warming to her theme. Turn the tables. If they want to drown us in despair, we drown them in drivel. It's not just about boring them, it's about making them question why they ever bothered with us in the first place. Drex scratched his chin. So, what you're saying is, we weaponize our own stupidity. Hey, humans are notoriously good at that, Facula snorted. Just look at our history. Exactly, Calla said. We've got hours of old TV reruns, pointless weather updates from Earth, hell. I'll even throw in those terrible motivational podcasts nobody listens to. I reckon it's worth a shot, Drex said after a moment's contemplation. We're not exactly swimming in alternatives. Great, Calla replied, clapping her hands together. Then let's start with something truly diabolical. Who here remembers the Big Bang Theory? The room erupted in groans. Even Drex winced. The thought of that particular relic of human culture being their salvation was almost as terrifying as the aliens themselves. Leech, ever the optimist, nodded with what little enthusiasm he could muster. We've got the recordings backed up somewhere. I think there's also an entire season of Friends archived if they survive the first barrage. Perfect, Calla said, her fingers dancing over the console. Let's give those aliens a taste of Earth's finest, our unyielding ability to laugh at our own absurdity. And so, the plan was set into motion. Calla and Leech worked tirelessly, their fingers flying over keyboards as they set up a broadcast that would make even the most stoic alien question their life choices. The command center buzzed with a renewed energy, a spark of purpose that had been missing for far too long. As they worked, Drex watched with a mixture of hope and skepticism. It was a harebrained idea, sure, but it was theirs. And if there was one thing humans excelled at, it was making the best out of a bad situation. Or at least, finding a way to laugh about it. The first transmission went out, a crackling ripple of sound that danced through the ether, carrying with it the unmistakable cadence of canned laughter and sitcom catchphrases. The colonists gathered around, listening with a mix of irony and nostalgia, the familiar voices weaving through the tension like an old friend who'd overstayed their welcome, but was still somehow comforting. Here's to hoping the aliens have a soft spot for 21st century TV, Facula quipped, raising an imaginary glass in a toast to their lunacy. And if they don't, Leech asked, his voice tinged with genuine curiosity. Then we give them more, Calla replied simply. If there's one thing humans have in spades, it's an endless supply of inanity. As they settled into the rhythm of their newfound strategy, the command center became a hive of activity. Screens flickered with scenes from old shows, dialogues blending into a cacophony of distraction designed to confound their alien adversaries. It was chaos, but it was their chaos, and it gave them something to cling to when reality threatened to overwhelm. Hours passed, the transmissions continuing unabated. In the lull between broadcasts, Drex found himself recalling the stories they'd shared earlier, the snippets of Earth that now seemed both distant and impossibly close. It was funny, he mused, how the most mundane things could take on such importance in the face of annihilation. The aliens, for their part, seemed as bewildered as the humans had hoped. The plasma bursts that had once punctuated the colonists' days with unnerving regularity became sporadic, as if the beings behind them were too busy scratching their metaphorical heads to focus on destruction. "Looks like they are as confused as we are," Facula observed, watching the sensors for any sign of incoming trouble. "Confusion's good," Drex said, a hint of satisfaction in his voice. "Means they're not blowing us to hell." But even as the initial success of their plan buoyed their spirits, the reality of their situation loomed large. Resources were still dwindling, the blockade remained unbroken, and the sun was still a distant memory, hidden behind the ever-present alien ships. "Think they'll ever get bored enough to just leave?" Leach asked, his tone more hopeful than he probably intended. Calla shrugged, a wry smile playing across her lips. "Maybe, or they'll just find us even more insufferable than before." "Insufferable's our specialty," Facula said, her voice light, but with an edge that spoke to the weight resting on all their shoulders. Amidst the noise of their bizarre and daring defense, the colonists found a kind of rhythm. If there was a word for it, it might have been resilience, but Drex preferred to think of it as stubbornness. Because at the end of the day, that's what it boiled down to: pure, unmitigated stubbornness. As the transmissions continued, Drex reflected on the irony of it all. Here they were, a colony on the brink of ruin, pinning their survival on the hope that their former lives, the lives they'd left behind for the promise of a new frontier, held the key to outwitting an alien enemy. But maybe that was the point, he realized. Maybe, in the end, it was the simplest things, the things that made them who they were, that would see them through. "Think we'll make it?" Facula asked, echoing the question that seemed to hang perpetually in the air, a constant companion to their efforts. "Honestly," Drex replied, the ghost of a smile tugging at his lips, "I have no idea, but I know one thing." "What's that?" "We're too damn stubborn to quit." And so, as the transmissions played on, filling the void with a symphony of human absurdity, the colonists continued their fight. Against the odds, against the darkness, and against the silence that threatened to consume them. In the end, it wasn't a grand battle or a heroic sacrifice that defined their resistance. It was this, a crazy, harebrained scheme cooked up in the depths of despair that gave them a fighting chance. And maybe, just maybe, it would be enough. Captain Drex leaned back, the chair squeaking in protest. The command center was a flurry of activity, but for once, it wasn't the panicked kind. Good thing, since panic had grown tiresome 2 weeks ago. The kind of tiring that made you want to nap through an alien invasion. Besides, who could think straight when their brains were constantly screaming like a tea kettle left on the burner? "So what's next on the playlist of cosmic torture?" Drex asked, his voice carrying more sarcasm than curiosity. "More of those delightful sitcoms?" Calla, eyes glued to the console, smirked. "Nah, figured we'd try something more sophisticated this time." Introducing the endless drone of academic lectures. Leach, her trusty sidekick, sat nearby, expression a mix of horror and admiration, emotions that seemed to define his relationship with Calla. "Really? We're going from canned laughter to soporific professors. What next, Gregorian chants?" Facula, perched as always on her cargo crate throne, chuckled. "I dunno, those monks can be pretty catchy if you're into medieval pop." Drex rubbed his temples, where a headache threatened to set up permanent residence. "So how's the plan looking? Are the aliens throwing in the towel yet, or should we just bore ourselves to death for them?" Calla remained unflappable, fingers moving like a pianist on a concert night. "Sensors show their patrols are less frequent, almost as if they are confused, or asleep, or both," Leach suggested. "Can't imagine alien minds dealing well with human tedium." "Good," Calla replied with a nod. "That's what we're aiming for. If they are busy trying to figure out our fascination with meaningless dribble, they're not wrecking our only home. And if they are really unlucky, they might accidentally learn something," Drex added with a half-smile, standing up and stretching. "Heaven forbid." The room buzzed with the constant hum of machinery, and the whispered exchanges of colonists who had learned to work in sync, all while pretending everything was just fine and dandy. The truth was, most of them had left Earth to escape the mundane, only to find that the real adventure was discovering just how creatively one could weaponize it. "All right, Captain," Fasula said, sliding off her perch. "What's the next move? I mean, after we've bored them into a stupor." Drex crossed his arms, looking out at the barren landscape of Solstice beyond the command center's thin walls. "We exploit the hell out of it, that's what. While they're distracted, we need to find a way to hit them where it hurts." "With what?" "Our razor-sharp wits and boundless optimism," Leach asked, his sarcasm as thick as the expectations weighing on his shoulders. "Something like that," Drex replied, tapping the console with an air that suggested he might have had an idea, but was too damn tired to remember what it was. "We've got a few tricks left up our sleeves." Kala glanced up from her screen. "You mean the sleeves we haven't sold for food yet?" "Exactly those," Drex confirmed. "Which means we'd better put on our Sunday best and pray it works." The plan was as simple as it was ludicrous. While the aliens were bogged down in the quicksand of Earth trivia and human history, the colonists would coordinate a series of raids on the alien patrols. The goal was to disrupt their operations long enough to create an opening for a real offensive. Fasula grinned, her enthusiasm infectious even in the face of likely annihilation. "I'll start rallying the troops. Anyone not brain-dead from our broadcast should be ready to move out." "Great," Kala said, turning back to her work. "And if any of them ask questions, just tell them it's a surprise party." Drex gave a mock salute. "Here's to hoping they've forgotten how to unwrap a gift." The room settled into a rhythm, the kind that came with familiarity and necessity. There was something oddly comforting about the chaos, like a family gathering where everyone pretended to like each other for the sake of tradition. "Hey, Drex," Fasula called out as she gathered a ragtag group of volunteers. "What do we do if this all goes belly up?" He considered the question for a moment, then shrugged. "I dunno. Reenact the Last Supper with freeze-dried rations. We'll figure it out when we get there." "Good to know we're in such competent hands," Fasula replied with a mock bow before setting off. As the makeshift militia assembled, Drex took a moment to appreciate the strange camaraderie that had developed among the colonists. It was the kind of bond forged in shared hardship, where everyone was equally aware of the odds and equally determined to defy them. "Kala," he said, pulling her aside, "you sure this is gonna work?" She met his gaze, eyes filled with a mixture of defiance and exhaustion. "No. But it's the only plan we've got that doesn't involve rolling over and dying." "Right," Drex said, nodding. "Guess that'll have to do." As the first raiding part is set out, the command center continued its relentless broadcast of world-weary academia and sitcom wisdom. The atmosphere was tense, but there was also a thread of hope woven into it. A belief that maybe, just maybe, being underestimated could be their greatest strength. Over the course of several hours, reports filtered back in. The alien patrols had started to unravel, their carefully constructed patterns disrupted by the sudden and unexpected human assault. It was as if the aliens had spent so long underestimating humanity that they had forgotten the species' most defining trait, its insatiable knack for causing trouble. "Looks like we've got a few wins under our belt," Fasula reported, her voice crackling over the comms. "Their formations are collapsing like a house of cards in a hurricane." "Excellent," Drex said, allowing himself a small smile. "Let's keep it up. Hit them where it hurts and keep them guessing." The raiding parties continued their guerrilla tactics, each success bolstering the colonists' morale and providing a lifeline in the form of captured alien technology and dwindling resources. In the command center, Kala monitored the situation with the air of a conductor guiding an orchestra. Her commands came swift and precise, the rest of the team responding with a kind of practiced chaos that only they could understand. Throughout it all, the broadcasts continued, relentless in their pursuit of intellectual sabotage. Leach worked alongside Kala, his admiration for her growing with each passing minute. "You know," he said, glancing at her as they worked, "if this actually works, you might just become the galaxy's most unlikely hero." She snorted, shaking her head. "Me a hero? Nah, I'm just the engineer. You can keep the heroics. I'm here for the scrap metal." Drex, observing the scene, couldn't help but chuckle. It was a small moment of levity in a situation that had very few, but it was enough to keep their spirits buoyed. Iors bled into each other, the colonists dancing a precarious line between victory and disaster. But as the raids continued, it became abundantly clear that the aliens were faltering. Their once imposing armada now seemed a shadow of its former self, plagued by infighting and confusion. "Looks like the plan's working," Fasula reported, her voice tinged with triumph. "The bastards are on the ropes." "Let's not get cocky," Drex cautioned, though his tone carried a hint of relief. "We're not out of this yet." As the pressure mounted, the colonists doubled down on their efforts, determined to capitalize on the aliens' disarray. It was a chaotic dance, a symphony of missteps and misdirection, but it was working. Against all odds, it was working. The broadcasts continued, a steady stream of human culture and inanity that had become their lifeline. Each transmission a reminder of what they were fighting for and what they stood to lose. In the end, it wasn't the strength of their weapons or the cunning of their tactics that defined the colonists' resistance. It was their ability to take the mundane and turn it into something extraordinary. To take the very essence of what made them human and use it as a weapon against an enemy that couldn't understand. And maybe, just maybe, it would be enough to tip the balance in their favor. The final push was on the horizon, a looming specter of hope and desperation intertwined. Drex knew that the coming days would determine their fate, but for the first time in a long time, he felt a flicker of optimism. "All right, everyone," he said, addressing the command center with all the gravitas of a man who'd seen one too many crises. "Let's wrap this up. We've got an alien armada to send packing." Kala and Leech exchanged a glance, their resolve mirrored in each other's eyes. Fasula's laughter echoed through the comms, a sound that promised victory or at least a damn good attempt. And so, as they prepared to face the final test, the colonists of Solstice found solace in the absurdity of their situation, in the knowledge that, against all odds, they had turned the tide with nothing more than a library's worth of old Earth nonsense and a stubborn refusal to give in. Because in the end, that was what it meant to be human, finding humor in the darkest of places and turning the impossible into the inevitable. The command center on Solstice hummed with the kind of energy that came from defying all odds. The colonists had done it. They'd actually done it. They'd bored an alien armada into submission with nothing but reruns of 20th century sitcoms and a relentless barrage of human trivia. Who knew that the secret to surviving an extraterrestrial siege involved subjecting their would-be conquerors to the timeless agony of laugh tracks and pie charts? "Well, I'll be damned," Captain Drex muttered, looking out at the horizon, no longer marred by the oppressive shadows of alien dreadnoughts. "We might just get through this after all." Fasula, taking her usual place on the cargo crate throne, smirked. "Guess they couldn't handle our razor-sharp wit after all, huh? Or maybe they just couldn't stomach another episode of The Office," Kala added, not even bothering to look up from her console. "Alien psychology must be a fragile thing." Leech chuckled, leaning against the wall with the kind of relief that only comes from narrowly escaping death by cosmic boredom. "We should be careful, though. If they come back with a taste for sitcoms, we might be responsible for cultural contamination on an interstellar scale." "Yeah, and we all know how that turns out," Drex said dryly. "Next thing you know, they are demanding royalties on That's What She Said jokes." Kala, ever the pragmatist, clapped her hands to get everyone's attention. "All right, back to work. The broadcasts might have bought us some time, but we've got a lot of rebuilding to do." The command center erupted into a flurry of activity. It was a chaos that had become second nature to the colonists, each of them moving with the kind of purpose that comes from living on the edge. They were bruised, battered, but not broken, and that counted for something. Drex moved through the orchestrated madness, a general surveying the battlefield after the dust had settled. There were still repairs to make, systems to reboot, and the never-ending challenge of keeping everyone fed and clothed. But for the first time in too long, it felt like there was a future to plan for, rather than just a present to survive. "Hey, Captain," Fasula called as she helped a group of colonists patch up a hole in the outer wall. "What's the plan now that we've scared them off with our terrifying knowledge of pop culture?" Drex scratched his chin thoughtfully. "I guess we build, piece by piece if we have to. We've got the bones of a good colony here, just need to flesh it out again." "And what about the morale?" Leach chimed in. "People are running on fumes. We might need something a little more substantial than a pep talk." "Yeah, like a miracle," Fasula muttered. "Or a decent meal," Kala added, her voice carrying over the mechanical din. Drex nodded. "We'll start with the essentials: food, water, power. Once we've got those sorted, we can worry about recapturing that good old frontier spirit." The room buzzed with the kind of optimism that came from knowing you'd made it through the worst. It was a fragile thing, easily shattered by the next crisis, but for now, it was enough to keep everyone moving forward. As the day wore on, the command center slowly transformed from a war room into a hub of reconstruction. The colonists, tired but determined, threw themselves into the work with a vitality born of necessity. There were fields to replant, systems to recalibrate, and defenses to fortify. The aliens might have retreated, but the threat of their return loomed large. Fasula paused, wiping sweat from her brow as she looked over the bustling scene. "You know, when I signed up for this colony gig, I thought it'd be all starry skies and adventure. Instead, it's been more like a never-ending episode of Survivor." "Well, at least you didn't get voted off the island," Kala quipped, her dry sarcasm cutting through the air like a lifeline. Drex chuckled, shaking his head. "That's us, the ultimate underdogs. Proving humanity's adaptability one disaster at a time." Leach, fiddling with a piece of alien tech they'd scavenged during the raids, nodded. "And who knew? Turns out we're pretty good at it." "Yeah," Kala agreed, a rare smile tugging at her lips. "We might be short on resources, but we're long on creativity. That counts for something." As night fell on Solstice, the colony settled into an uneasy rhythm. It was a fragile peace, but it was theirs. The stars, no longer obscured by the oppressive bulk of the alien fleet, twinkled down like old friends, a reminder of everything they'd fought to protect. Drex found himself on the command center balcony, looking out at the sprawling colony below. There was still so much to do, but for the first time in ages, he felt a flicker of hope. A belief that maybe, just maybe, they could make a life here worth living. Fasula joined him, leaning against the railing with a sigh. "Think they'll come back?" Drex shrugged. "Probably, but we'll be ready for them. Next time we'll hit them with Seinfeld and watch their heads explode." "You ever think about what keeps us going?" Fasula asked, her voice softer now, almost contemplative. "Stubbornness mostly," Drex replied, a wry smile playing on his lips. "We're a species built on defying the odds. It's what we do best." As they stood there, sharing a moment of quiet camaraderie, the reality of their situation settled over them. They might not have chosen this path, but it was theirs now, and they would see it through to the bitter end. "We've got a long road ahead," Fasula remarked, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "Yeah, but at least it's a road," Drex replied, not missing a beat. "And for what it's worth, I'd rather walk it with you lot than anyone else." The air was thick with the scent of potential, of possibility. It was a heady thing, the promise of what could be, tempered by the weight of what had been. But it was enough to keep them moving forward, one step at a time. As the night deepened, the colony gradually quieted, the frenetic energy giving way to a much-needed rest. The stars above bore witness to the slow but steady rebirth of Solstice, a testament to human stubbornness, creativity, and an unyielding spirit. Kala, still at her console, looked up at the night sky, eyes tracing the constellations she'd become all too familiar with. "Think anyone out there knows we're still kicking?" she asked aloud, to no one in particular. Leech, still tinkering away at his side project, grinned. "If they don't, they are in for a hell of a surprise." "Let them come," Fasula chimed in from across the room. "We've got reruns for days and a whole lot of sass left to unleash." Drex turned from the window, his expression one of resolute determination. "We faced the worst they could throw at us and came out the other side. I'd say that calls for a drink." Fasula raised an imaginary glass, her grin infectious. "To Solstice and her merry band of misfits. Long may we provide comic relief to the universe." They laughed, a sound that rang out in the stillness like a promise of resilience, of defiance, of humanity at its finest. The night wore on, the colony gradually settling into a much-needed slumber, but even as they slept, dreams of what could be mingled with the harsh realities of what had been. They were survivors, each and every one of them, and they would continue to forge ahead, come what may. The aliens might have their technology and their warships, but they didn't have what really counted: the sheer bloody-mindedness of a species that refused to roll over and die. That, in the end, was humanity's greatest weapon. As Drex closed his eyes, the weight of leadership momentarily lifted. He knew that whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, they would face them together, united in purpose, if not always in mind. Because if there was one thing he'd learned from this whole ordeal, it was that humans were at their best when things were at their worst. And that gave him hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, they could turn this patch of desolation into something resembling home. And so, as the night stretched on, the colonists of Solstice dreamed of fields green with life, of laughter echoing through sturdy halls, of a place where they could finally lay down roots and truly belong. A place where they could be more than survivors. A place where they could thrive. On the balcony, Drex whispered a silent prayer to the stars. "Here's to us, and to the fools who underestimated the power of a good story." And as the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, it painted the colony in shades of hope and possibility, a reminder that even in the darkest of places, light could find a way in. Because in the end, that was what it meant to be human: to laugh in the face of adversity, to dream in the face of despair, and to fight like hell for the things that truly mattered. And that, as far as Drex was concerned, was more than enough to keep going.